Hello, this is Rodney with PawWorks Web Design in association with Tropical Pine Tree.
New York Comic-Con 2017, Star Talk. This is our commentary on that show.
Welcome to Star Talk Live at New York Comic-Con. Tonight's topic, we're talking about human augmentation. Professional comedian Chuck Nice, a professor of bioethics, Michael Liao, Mythbuster Adam Savage.
As we were listening to them, they were talking about conventional ideas about human augmentation. What are you guys' views on human augmentation?
In and of itself, it's not a bad thing. I mean, and if you think about it, glasses and hearing aids can be considered augmentations.
So human augmentation is where you're adding some sort of additional capacities to our organism.
Mm-hmm.
And those are very useful things.
Indeed, indeed.
So I think in the proper moderation, there's nothing wrong with it.
Also, something like a pacemaker sort of inserted in your body is a really good augmentation. Otherwise, you might have problems staying alive. There's a lot of things. There are drugs that you take, drugs to keep your health, drugs to keep your heart healthy, or keep your diabetes under control, keep pain under control. That's augmentation.
Mm-hmm.
Why would Green Hornet be someone who is augmented?
Well, in the same vein that Batman is, really, they both use various gadgets and gizmos to assist their crime fighting.
If we're going to talk about augmentation, and we're going to think about superheroes, we're kind of down to only two in that category. We're talking about Batman and Iron Man. How do we define super?
Segmented body armor.
Okay, and there's Iron Man too, because he has the whole exoskeleton thing. He has the heart implant, and he really goes all out in the gadgets, even more than the other two that I mentioned.
What about Mr. Gadget?
And I don't think he's really a superhero.
It's not exactly a superhero, but I guess he can be part of this conversation, even though he's not a traditional superhero.
Yeah, he's not really considered a superhero.
Yeah, he's more augmented than all of them combined.
What about Batman? You know, is it Batman, the one that the webs come out?
No, that's Spider-Man.
Spider-Man! What about Spider-Man?
Well, that depends on what version of the lore that you're dealing with. Most versions have it where the spider stuff is a supernatural power that he got from a radioactive spider, not...
Well, not exactly. It's pretty... Most of them actually say that he doesn't actually shoot web. He actually has a device on his wrist that does that for him. Who do you think would win? Batman or Iron Man?
I think if they were both restrained to real-world physics instead of comic book physics, Batman would have a better chance of winning, because Iron Man's suit would probably run across some sort of problem well before Batman's setup would.
Well, I think Batman would win because Iron Man's suit is obviously made out of iron. It's kind of heavy.
Well, if his thing is working just fine, it will support its own weight.
Oh, okay. Well,
but if
shows you how much I know about it.
That was part of the design, to make the suit more mobile, not less mobile.
Okay, I still think Batman will win.
All right.
Why would Batman win?
Batman sounds more...
I'm Batman!
Sounds more bad. Yeah, you can put all the different laughs in there like your joke.
That's the Joker, not Batman.
Okay, so why do you think Batman would, or Iron Man would win?
I think it would be very situational why they're even fighting.
It's a good point. Yeah, because they're supposed to be on the same team now, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. If they were fighting, it would really depend on why.
It's over a girl. Always over a girl. Lois Lane.
That's Superman. My Iron Man would lose because he'd be the big suave one.
There's this thing called the deep brain stimulation, and actually about 100,000 people in the world today already use it.
So if you get this thing implanted in your brain, who's to say, because there's all this urban legend about the TV will send waves out and control your mind. Well, now you have a good setup where they could just mess with you. I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Tell me about
Well,
the trolley.
that's kind of what they were suggesting with the closed loop system setup.
Right.
But
If you were a superpower, you could mess with their mind. You could mess with a whole bunch, 100,000 people right now, and more to come.
and like they said, that would never go wrong.
So, who wants to go first? You guys are familiar with the trolley problem, right?
So tell me about the trolley. I think I
The
understand.
trolley problem is you're standing at a railway switch, and the train is going to hit somebody. You can save a loved one, or you can save 5 people.
You've got the train coming down the track. You can't stop the train, but you can switch it from between track A and track B. Track A has a loved one stuck on the track for some reason. Track B has 5 people, random strangers, stuck to that track.
Well,
Which track do you set it down?
well, I figured this way. God put my loved ones in my family for a reason. I would go for my loved ones just because I love them. And these other people, as far as I know, could be, axe murderers. I'm not saying they are. I'd feel guilty no matter what I did. But, considering you're in my family or you're my loved one, obviously I'm going to who would you? Would you kill me?
No, I wouldn't. But I think that's the kind of thing that they were saying, is that you have this problem of all the safety commissions would want the cars to minimize damage, but then nobody's going to want to buy a car where if something went wrong, the car's going to target them because they're like the...
Yeah, it wouldn't kill me either.
Like, I don't want a car that might consider, like, crashing into, a wall or something would be better than, avoiding other people. It's like, they really want a car that would do that?
Well, in the first place, if this car was in control and was doing a really good job, it would have never gotten to that point in the first place. If you're in control of the car, how many times have you gotten into a situation like that?
This is a good point. And
They were saying earlier, even though they seem flawless, those computers and machines are not flawless.
Well,
this is a good point.
except for our computer programmer over here and everything that he programmed, that's flawless.
Well, one thing I was going to bring up is that a lot of people that are doing more serious research on the self-driving car issues do bring up that most of the time, yes, the car would take preventative measures well before it got itself into the trolley problem mess. And so trying to figure out what it would do once it gets into that kind of situation is kind of a moot point, because in most cases it would prevent itself from going that bad.
Well, when the computer had a, it was going with a hotspot or whatever, and it lost communication with the satellite, then all of a sudden...
Yeah, but there's exceptions to every rule, like reality has so graciously provided us with. So yes, and it's those kind of things that are a bigger issue to deal with is than, what to do in these kind of edge case scenarios.
What's the name of that big lake with a fountain in Orlando?
Lake Eola?
Yeah, Lake Eola. Now, if you ever try to use your GPS in that area, it's so messed up. It comes on, it comes off, it comes on. Every block is a different thing. And you get yourself so lost, whether if you just didn't turn it on at all, you'd find your way around the lake all by yourself because it's round. But the GPS can't figure that out because it keeps losing its spots.
And so then that would be a reason why they'd have to have, other systems and not rely simply on one system.
This wouldn't exactly solve the trolley problem, but it could take away the responsibility. I know it's a thing they could do is instead of have the car decide that, it could just switch back control if it thinks that's going to happen. Back to manual control, and the person can make whatever choice they feel they need to.
Well, unless the person's sitting back and playing on their
Then-
device and drinking a cup of coffee,
then
and it
it
says,
would be-
boom, now take control. And you're like, but I'm into this thing here.
I know, but I think that'd be kind of things you'd have to sign up for when you got a car like that.
I think in a lot of those types of situations, the car is going to have some sort of... Things are starting to go downhill. And so the car would be like, hey, you're going to have to I'm going to need you to start taking control over very soon, or, some sort of alarm. And so it's like, make sure that the human's, like, alerted that, yes, they have to take back over control.
I don't think a car will ever go fully automatic. I think you'll always still need to have your driver's license, be able to drive for when the computer runs into an issue like this. For just day-to-day driving, I think that's certainly a thing, but I don't think they'll eliminate the need for you to still have your driver's license.
That's true. And if it was an accident, who would you sue? Would you sue the car company who made the car that also was defective or something happened? Or would you sue the human who was in the car and owned the car?
That's going to definitely make things more complicated, certainly. I think that also would depend on which mode the car was in, and if it did make any attempts to alert the driver beforehand. Because, if it's one of those situations where the human thought everything was okay and he could take his eyes off the road for a moment because the car had everything under control, and then the car suddenly didn't have everything under control and didn't give any warning to the user until bam, well, then it's, then I'd say it's more the people who made the car's fault. But if the car did make reasonable attempts to try to alert the human that, hey, you have to take over, and the human still didn't take over, then it's probably more the fault of the user.
What if the user was incapacitated, like they had like a seizure or were narcoleptic or something?
That's a good point. And I think that would be kind of one of those situations where if the car would have to kind of, and I think some cars do something similar to this, some of the higher end cars, where if they detect that the human isn't doing so good, they actually just pull over and stop.
Wow, I've never heard anything like that.
I've heard about this. This is only on some like high-end luxury models, so it's not really a common feature. But I've seen some cars actually do this. Some places were really proud of the fact that they could get their cars to do that.
And I think if you have seizures or epilepsy, I don't think you're allowed to have a driver's license anyway. So
True.
That particular case would be a moot point. But
I know.
You could have a heart attack, you could faint,
Yeah.
you have a diabetic event.
Yeah.
So
it
there's a
was
lot
just
of
an
things.
example.
Yeah.
And people don't always follow the rules.
No.
Oh no, he always followed the rules.
So some people choose to live with whatever they've been dealt, whether it's by birth or by war or by whatever. Like, that's people refusing the an implant to let them hear, or somebody wanting to stay in a wheelchair, you know what I mean? And it's their choice to make whether they want that or not, but what is interesting is, say a deaf child was born to deaf parents. The parents would sometimes not feel a need to have let that kid have an implant to have the kid hear, because they can already communicate with them, being deaf themselves. But do the parents have an obligation to have that implant done anyways? Or say a child was born blind, would they have to have an implant for that?
If you go to a facility, speaking as a nurse, you have a right to refuse medicine, you have a right to refuse treatment. However, that's if you're of sound mind. Now, if you've committed yourself or somebody committed you to a facility because you've have Alzheimer's and dementia and you just cannot take care of yourself, if you're of sound mind. Now, take it a step further, and let's say you were put into a facility by your family because you've had a severe case of Alzheimer's and dementia, and you could not make these decisions for you. Would it be the facilities to make sure that, for instance, your teeth is brushed because it would be for your own good health, or that you ate a well-balanced diet even though you chose not to eat? Well, I guess it's hard to make somebody eat. But that you don't run around without clothes on, for instance, because you just don't see the need for the facility to stop and say, we need to put clothes on you, because that's just common sense. at what point is the line drawn? And when you take children and you have parents who are obligated to make sure that that child has a good life, that's a really hard one, because depending upon what the problem is and how expensive or extensive the treatment is, it could be more harmful. There could be side effects that could kick in and cause more damage. But the child doesn't have a say, it's the parent.
On the one hand, you could say that maybe the child should have the option to be able to hear with the other kids in this class that can hear. But if the cost of the operation to get the implant was such a big strain on the family's finances that they would have to end up doing without certain other important things, or maybe the kid had some other damage to the nerve or whatever, like a defect, and so the implant wouldn't work quite right. I think the problem with trying to come up with a simple rule for one of these things is that humans aren't simple. There's always going to be something about everyone that's different. Always going to be some part of this thing that, while it may work with a whole bunch of people, there's going to be a reason why it may not work so well for you.
Living with having children who had special circumstances growing up, what would you say if you could have had something done to potentially take that away?
Well, I think as a parent especially, you don't want your children to have any problems. And if you could do something that would help them, you would. However, we have cases in history where, and in fact this happened to you, so I'm going to talk about it. Is it okay if I talk a little bit about your Asperger's?
Yeah, it's totally cool.
So you with Asperger's, no matter what I did to get you to brush your teeth, you wouldn't brush them. I could hold you down and you would scream and you would kick. No matter what I did, we never got them brushed right. And we had to take you to the dentist, and the dentist said, whoa, we're going to, it's really bad in there. We're going to have to put her out and do all this stuff. Well, I'm like, is it really that bad? And they're like, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible. So we did that. But found out later on that a lot of dentists were doing that because they were making a lot of money off of people doing that. So I'm not convinced that you really needed to go through everything you went through. And yet the dentist probably got a week's vacation off in Mexico or something, while it was a very traumatic thing for you, and I'm not sure that you benefited that much. In fact, if anything, I think that there were probably good teeth that were ruined because of him. I don't know for sure, but I've seen a lot of things where that kind of stuff has happened. And of course I would do things that make you better. And but there are times it's out of your control too as well. And if you follow the latest medical advice, it could be 20 years later you found out that everything you did was wrong and you've caused more damage than good.
Yeah, there has definitely been times where stuff that at the time that we thought it seemed like perfectly valid stuff. I mean, you think about it, how long did the plastics of bloodletting, what during its time frame, everybody thought it was the greatest thing. We've since then learned how horrible it actually is.
Would you start having people amputate their arms so they can get one of these?
They were talking about prosthetics way better than your natural body. Would people then decide to just amputate their healthy limbs for the prosthetic ones that could outperform them?
So it kind of gets into a dangerous territory when you start going that route. So I'm not really quite sure how to kind of mitigate that kind of factor. But that's how the board started out. Is just race of people who had these bionics things, and then they kept making the bionics better and better, and more people wanted to get the the enhancements, and less people wanted to stay without them. And so then it got to be to the fact that everybody was super enhanced.
First of all, I think you're jumping the gun when you say, we have this technology, we've got this bionic arm, let's go do it. It's going to be really difficult to find a doctor who's going to do that. There just aren't that many doctors who are going to take that type of risk, get sued. So if you really wanted to get your arm amputated, you might have to go find somebody who would be doing it for, money, and may not be that qualified. And so you're going to be most likely putting yourself at risk in that thing. Another thing to consider is how heavy is the bionic arm. Is it going to be heavier than your own arm or lighter? Because that's going to throw your balance off, and that's going to throw your whole movement. It's going to cause a lot of problems with you in the future. So if your arm was heavier, it's going to be constantly pulling you this way, and that's going to be pulling on your muscles. You could end up potentially be a cripple. So you really got to think this through before you think, oh, well, yeah, that sounds good. I'll just chop off my arm. Really, how many people, when it comes right down to that, would actually take their arm off? And I don't think the medical society, at least at this point, would condone that.
All right, that's an interesting. I know you're not a doctor, but you are a nurse, and you've worked with a lot of people, and so I think that's quite a fascinating opinion.
Well, and also you have to find, even if you found a doctor who would do it, you would have to find surgeons, you would have to find the anesthesiologist, you'd have to find all kinds of people that would support you. And it might be very hard to get a crew that way, because a lot of people's conscious and ways of thinking would stop them from doing that. So even if it was brought into a hospital and say, okay, our hospital will give you a prosthetic bionic arm if you want to cut it off, and this is our policy, they're going to have a lot of people quitting and saying, I'm not going to be involved in this, I'm going to go to another hospital. And by the time you get to the people who actually will do this, you have to really wonder about their motives and how well they're trained. And and the other half is, let's say everything went fine and it worked and it was great. There's no saying that you're not that there might at some point an infection that comes into your system, and in order to treat that, you may lose more than just your prosthetic arm. You could lose your life. It's something you really have to think of in terms of, first of all, it's not going to be happening anytime soon, but if it was happening, there's got to be a lot of limits and regulations put in place.
Your opinion is quite interesting, as most people assume that all that stuff is magically okay, but it's good to hear a more realistic opinion on that. Glasses are an augmentation. What if it would seem similar to having glasses?
The eye surgery, like the LASIK,
Oh, well, let's talk about LASIK for a while. I know they've improved it a lot, but the first maybe year or two, the people that had LASIK surgery, they actually, the little cuts that they put had problems. It was very expensive and painful to get that fixed, and some people just couldn't. I mean, it was so damaged. It may sound really good, but there's so many things that could go wrong.
And certainly that's always the possibility that, whenever you mess with things, that it can always break, and it breaking in unusual ways. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find more about us on our website, tropicalpinetree.com. Also, please consider supporting us on Patreon, or at least hitting the subscribe button down below. And also check us out for more videos coming soon. Thank you.